Revenue.
So now delegates across the world will deliberate on how to effectively counter effects of climate change on various fronts as the Africa Climate Summit gets underway in Nairobi next week. A report on how African children continue to bear the brunt of adverse effects of weather indicates that developing nations continue to turn a blind eye to children's needs in developing countries despite a high percentage of risk of effects of climate change. And as Gloria Milemo reports, experts warn that this disparity risks contributing to adverse social outcomes.
As the effects of climate change continue to rise globally, children in Africa are said to be at most risk of extreme weather events. Ironically, they continue to be neglected by disparities in key climate financing, meant to help them adapt, survive, and respond to the climate crisis effectively.
Coming from a community, a Maasai community in the northern parts of Tanzania, where we depend on nature for our livelihood, that is through agriculture and pastoralism, climate change is really affecting us in the ground. Climate change is happening, and with the extreme weather conditions and droughts, famine that is happening, food insecurity is threatening us.
A report by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, and UN Environment Program, UNEP, indicates that only 2.4% of the multilateral climate funds that plays a vital role in channeling climate finance from developed to developing nations is allocated to projects that are child-responsive. This, according to experts, deepens the challenges and inequalities caused by extreme weather events among this demographic.
The global system is not walking the talk in terms of putting its funds in the places that matter most. Now, and the message that we have is that let's move together as a global society to target these challenges that young children are facing the most. And that way, we can channel resources to make sure that they target the specific needs that children have in terms of facing the climate challenge.
The report that advocates for urgent policy and actions is geared towards the right to safe and healthy environment for children. In a bid to counter the adverse effects of climate change among children who are disproportionately affected, experts advise the need to strengthen the resilience of systems to provide essential services to help decrease vulnerability of children and their communities.
The young people in Africa have done the least to change the climate, but they are receiving the most of the effect and the worst of its effect. 17% of the global population is on the continent, and 70% of the population on the continent is under 30. So the continent is really at the crossroad, and while it emits less than 4% of global emissions, as we've said, it is going to be the most affected, and it is already the most affected.
They also want the scaling up of funding to programs that are child and gender-centered, and also the need for developing countries to increase part of their domestic resources in order to invest in climate change adaptation and mitigation that will help preserve the future of children, among other recommendations. Gloria Milemo, KTN News.
In business, new taxes takes